Good morning, Marijuana Nation. Just a quick reminder that I'll be out of podcasting commission for a few days, but will be back in the full swing of things on Wednesday, August 9th. In the meantime, enjoy some of these back episodes of our pilot series, Marijuana Today Story Hour. And of course, you can keep up to date on all the headlines while I'm gone by subscribing to the MJ Today Daily Headlines email newsletter over at mjtodaydaily.com and the MJ Today Media newsfeed over at mjtodaymedia.com/newsfeed. Welcome to episode number 1 of Marijuana Today Story Hour, where we talk to one interesting person with one great story from the worlds of marijuana, business, politics, and activism. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and today I'm talking with activist, lobbyist, and a regular on our weekly podcast, Marijuana Today, Aaron Houston. Aaron has a great story to tell from his time working against a particularly clever piece of prohibitionist legislation. But before we get to Aaron's story, we need to thank our sponsor, the Ohm of Medicine Medical Marijuana Dispensary of Ann Arbor, Michigan, for their support. The Ohm of Medicine is the kind of place you want to get your medicine from. Their no-pressure atmosphere is long on education and completely short of pushy sales. You just get the medicine that you need. Check them out at ohmofmedicine.org. That's O-M-O-F medicine.org. Aaron Houston served as Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, my favorite drug policy organization, from 2010 to 2013 after graduating from the University of Colorado in Denver. He got his start in politics working for the president of the Colorado Senate and today lives in Washington, D.C., where he makes a living as a freelance lobbyist with a focus on drug and marijuana policy. So, Aaron, what's your story?
Yeah, so this is a good one. I like this story also because in this age of divided partisan politics and deep divides within the country, this kind of shows has a happy ending about cooperation even among adversaries. So I think I've mentioned this story before to listeners in passing, but Senator Tom Coburn was a senator from Oklahoma. And in 2007 and 2009, he very cleverly and deviously attempted, which I'll describe in a moment, the dynamics of that, attempted to preempt all of the state medical marijuana laws through an obscure change in federal law. So Senator Coburn had really he'd spoken about marijuana. It was obvious that he did not like it. He's anti-drug. He had a not particularly nuanced view of drug policy issues in general. But in 2007, Senator Coburn introduced an amendment that he actually got attached to a bill reforming what was originally called PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. It was later changed to the FDA Revitalization Act. Many of the current drug laws that we have actually came from that bill. And Senator Coburn, it was a must-pass piece of legislation. Senator Coburn successfully attached his amendment to the bill in committee that would have preempted all of the state medical marijuana laws. Now, let me describe that for just a moment, get into the really nerdy details of this, and listeners can understand how incredibly complicated this was to describe to members of Congress with varying levels of intellectual capacity. Basically, we know that the federal law still prohibits marijuana outright. Federal law still bans marijuana, but state laws are allowed to exist. They have existed, providing for medical marijuana. How is that the case? That we have a federal law saying it's completely banned and a state law allowing for it? It's because of the preemption scheme, the federal preemption scheme that Congress has laid out, essentially guiding courts on judging what is legal and what is not, and whether there's a direct conflict versus an implied conflict. There are certain areas of federal law that the federal law can just wipe out the state laws. The FDA is a really good example of that. Senator Coburn was trying to change the preemption that we are currently still under with marijuana, from an express scheme to an implied scheme of preemption that was much weaker, had much weaker protections for the state laws, just like the FDA. Imagine you don't see states with drug approval laws. That's because they would be preempted by the federal law. So Senator Coburn was trying to change this, and he did it in a way that was extremely clever because, as you can tell from that lengthy explanation just now, it doesn't fit easily into a 30-second soundbite on an elevator to explain to a member of Congress or a senator. So Senator Coburn attached this to the bill in 2007. We beat him. I led the coalition around it, worked with Senator Kennedy's staff and others on the committee, and worked with Bill Piper from DPA and others from the ACLU who pitched in as well, and got the amendment taken out of the final version of the bill just by the hair on our chinny chin chin. Fast forward a couple of years to 2009, and Senator Coburn is on the committee that's considering now another FDA bill. It's the tobacco bill, the tobacco regulation bill. And he attempts and fails to attach his amendment to the legislation at that point. But we had to keep fighting him all throughout the process. We had to fight at every turn. Anytime there was a floor fight, we had to be monitoring the FDA tobacco control bill and making sure that he wasn't attaching the same amendment that we had successfully beaten back in 2007. So, frantically lobbying around, I believe this was actually, there's a sub-interesting story from this, that in the process of lobbying for this, against this amendment, I discovered a member of Congress, who I shall not name, but a Republican member of Congress from the South, who actually believed that medical marijuana was Marinol. He actually was confused. And I had to say the words out loud with a straight face. No, Congressman, you're referring to the FDA-approved... I didn't laugh at the time. You're referring to the FDA-approved pill Marinol, which is a synthetic THC and only contains one synthetic component of the whole marijuana plant. We're talking about botanical cannabis sativa L.
That's a whole nother level of not knowing, right?
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So imagine trying to explain preemption law to this guy, right? Yeah. It's just not going to work particularly well.
Maybe you have charts. Do you have charts and pictures? And
we probably needed them. Well, anyway, we're in a real tough fight here. And Senator Kennedy's staff had told me that. They said, there's a very good chance this amendment is going to make it into the bill. And on the Senate side, it's a lot more cryptic of a process than listeners may be accustomed to hearing about on the House side. We have a lot of our victories on the House side, and that's because under many rules that we've operated under over the years, not every year, but under many congressional sessions rules, we've had, our allies have had the ability to introduce amendments to various pieces of legislation, including the amendment that I was involved in passing, became law, what became originally was the Hinchy-Rohrabacher Amendment, the Farr-Rohrabacher Amendment became law, and that's how we were able to do that, through an open rule in the House. The Senate rules are a lot different, and in this case, with Senator Coburn's effort to add the medical marijuana preemption change, essentially banning medical marijuana nationwide, they were all backroom deals. They involved backroom deals among the senators. And Coburn was horse trading for various other things that he wanted to see in or out of the legislation. So we hear this from Senator Kennedy's staff and frantically lobbying him to get engaged. Senator Kennedy did actually personally lobby on this in the final days. I prepared a memo for him that was passed to him, and he was actually, I know, talking directly to leadership about it. So he was deeply involved in this. I think partially because he wanted to see a clean bill. He wanted his bill to pass, and he saw a medical marijuana ban on what he saw as positive legislation as a poison pill to it. So the final night of this legislation being considered, I'm scheduled by happenstance to go to a dinner. I'm supposed to go to a dinner with Republican senators, a big reception. And as I'm walking in, I'm on the phone with Senator Kennedy's staff, and she says, this thing's getting decided tonight. Leadership is working out the final details. We're still waiting to hear whether Senator Coburn's amendment is going to be considered germane. And germane is a fancy way of saying relevant in legislative speak. And so I said, okay, how real of this is a threat? This is not in the bill right now. It hasn't been in the bill from the beginning. Really, do we need to be worrying about this? She said, yes, this is a real threat. This might come to pass. She said, talk to every senator you can tonight. So I got off the phone with her. I turn around and I see Senator Murkowski from Alaska. She had just broken her leg, so I was able to catch up with her real quick. And I catch her, and we talk about how she just broke her leg. I was giving her some sympathies, and then I explained this amendment, and I asked if she would consider both protecting her own state's law, and the will of her state's voters over time, but also the rights of states around the country to pass these laws. And she, I think she said she'd consider it, and we joked about her. I think she made a joke about needing medical marijuana for her leg. Well, then I walk in to the room, and right in front of me there is Senator Coburn. And no kidding. He's just standing there. And I knew his chief of staff from some homeless advocacy that Coburn's chief of staff and I had engaged in together for a homeless gentleman on the Hill. So I walked up to Coburn and I said, hey, Senator Coburn, Aaron Houston, lobbying on marijuana, and I know Mike Schwartz, your chief of staff, we worked together on some homeless advocacy issues. And I said, Senator, I just thought it'd be fun to come up and say hi since we're fighting. And he said something I couldn't quite hear, but what I think he said was, you'd stop fighting. And I repeated because I thought he was confused at what I had said. I said, Senator, I'm the marijuana guy. We're fighting right now. And he said, Aaron, he puts his arm on my shoulder. He looks me in the eye and he says, Aaron, you can stop fighting. My amendment was ruled non-germane just a few minutes ago. And I swear I've never done this before, but I looked at him and I said, Senator, you're shitting me. And he said, I was so stunned. And he said, I would not joke you about something like that. he said, you can go get yourself a drink, Aaron. And so I went and called Senator Kennedy's staff first and then went and got myself a drink. But before I did get back to that room, I call his staff, and this is an interesting detail about the bipartisanship. I said, I just talked to Coburn. You're not going to believe this. I just talked to Coburn. He says his amendment is ruled non-germane. Have you heard anything? She said, no. She said, we're done. That's great. I said, wait, but if Senator Kennedy hasn't heard anything from leadership yet, I mean, you're the chief on this bill. How wouldn't you know this? And she said, don't worry. You can enjoy your night. We won. Coburn is a man of his word. His word is gold. He wouldn't lie to you about that. And so said, all right. Went in, schmoozed with some senators and reps for the rest of the night and, took in some victory laps.
And threw up on Coburn's shoes.
and what's that?
And threw up on Coburn's shoes.
that would have been more interesting. No.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, it's funny you mentioned that, because I got to say, in Washington, D.C., you would think with all these free drinks and stuff, you see more people intoxicated in alcohol. It's just not something that really happens among professionals here, because it's just so,
it's practiced.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, my Irish roots help me out in these situations, because I can keep my wits about me and other people will start talking. But, yeah, but it's a great story, because if Senator Coburn had wanted to be a jerk, he could have declined to tell me. He could have just smiled in reply. He could have done any number of things, but instead he said, take it easy, man. You won. Congrats. I mean, that's pretty gracious, And despite his devious attempts, deviously clever attempts to come after us, I've got a great deal of respect for him, and I disagree with him on probably just about every issue. But I got a great deal of respect for how he comported himself there that did not keep me from going home that night and creating a new entry in the Urban Dictionary for Coburn, which is, I'll just tell you the etymology of this first, which is here in the Urban Dictionary. Listeners can Google this. U.S. Senator Tom Coburn seems obsessed with marijuana to the point that he has several times attempted to get state medical marijuana laws declared illegal under federal law. In honor of his dedication to the issue, activists have named the, quote, consumption of marijuana through the oral cavity, the exact language of one of his amendments, by two people, a, quote, Coburn. In other words, let's go back to my dorm room and do a Coburn.
A Coburn. That's beautiful.
I couldn't help it. Yeah.
That's a pretty great story, Aaron.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's an interesting one. That was an interesting fight for sure.
Awesome. Well, that does it for this episode of Marijuana Today Story Hour. Big thanks to Aaron Houston for his time and for sharing that great story. Thanks to our sponsor, Ohm of Medicine of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And thanks to you, our listener, for tuning in and listening. We'll be back next time with one interesting person with one great story from the worlds of marijuana politics, business, and activism. Thanks for tuning in.
One take, Shay. One take.